Hello, everyone. Good afternoon, good evening, and good night, depending on where you are and when you are listening to this. This time we're going to be discussing Ed Gein, the inspiration of modern and retro horror movies, TV shows, many elements of modern and classical horror can be traced back to this man's crimes. Brace yourselves. This will get messy. But hi, Neat Noodle. Glad you could make it. And yeah, let's just get right into it. So, Ed Gein, born the 27th of August, 1906. He was born about 6 years before my great grandfather was born. Well, one of them was born in 1912. So, in terms of generational differences, Ed Gein is 3 generations removed from me. So like that's how far back his birth was in terms of eras. It was a long time ago, 1906, to George and Augusta Gein. George got drunk a lot on whiskey and was a very passive parent, which was very unusual for the time. Augusta, Ed's mother, was the domineering parent, the dominant parent, and George essentially just got drunk and beat Ed and his son and his brother, sorry, Henry, fairly often, and that was essentially his only contribution to their lives. And Henry went through the same stuff as Ed, and their domineering mother, Augusta, was a religious fanatic and probable paranoid schizophrenic. She was paranoid about sin, and she was deeply misogynistic and misandristic. She basically hated people. She said to Ed and Henry that all women were whores, and that sex is evil, and that anyone who has sex is evil, and any expressions of sexuality is evil, and you'll go to hell for it. And basically they had this. Ed and Henry were both born in La Crosse, Wisconsin, which was a fairly vibrant town at the time in the early 1900s, full of the amenities as you would expect in any large town of that era. And Augusta really didn't like that. She thought that the town was full of sin. They actually owned their own grocery store, and Augusta operated it. And the boys and George, the husband, basically were, staff to Augusta to a degree. And but eventually in 1914, Augusta, who got sick of living in a big town or a big city which she felt was full of sin and temptation for her husband and her sons, ordered that they sell the grocery store and buy a farm in rural Plainfield, Wisconsin. And this happened when Ed Gein was 8. So Ed was taken out of the town of La Crosse and into the rural countryside of Plainfield at age 8, which is a very important time. He was already not allowed. Neither Henry nor Ed were allowed to have friends of any kind. their mother Augusta would forbid it, and if they did find a friend, she'd eventually find something wrong with said friend and forbid them from interaction. So Ed and Henry both suffered greatly from physical abuse, psychological abuse, absolutely, but also they suffered from a lack of social interaction. They had poor social skills as a result of this. You could say the level of isolation and the abuse that came from that and the lack of social development, essentially she gave both of her sons, not learning difficulties, but social difficulties, and obviously in Ed's case serious psychological difficulties, which I think that she passed on to him from herself. I think that Augusta was a deeply paranoid schizophrenic, and because she masked herself in piety and religion, it was tolerated. But nowadays, she'd have been taken away, and the kids would have been taken away. But Augusta was a woman who was utterly devoid of any kind of love and affection, and was a very cold woman. Uh, and Ed was loyal to her despite this. He had a very close attachment to his mother, who he felt was protecting him from the evil world. She'd convinced him that the world was evil and that she was his only savior. Glad you could make it, and that she was her only kind of savior, and basically he cut himself off from the rest of the world and didn't develop any kind of relationships or friendships outside of his mother, who he held as being basically like a demigod kind of religious cult figure in his eyes. Augusta very much led the family on a cult, on the lines of a religious cult. She was the arbitrator of God's message on earth. This is how she uh, described herself and put herself forward to George, Henry, and Ed, that she was God's messenger on earth, and that if they didn't listen to what she said, they'd be condemned to hell, and that they were evil if they broke uh, from her decrees and her commandments. So basically, Augusta was a power crazed psychopath, and George, a passive, emasculated alcoholic. Who never stood up to his wife and took out all of his aggressions upon his sons like a coward. So, in terms of, you know, socialization, primary socialization, as a sociologist would term it. Ed and Henry Gein were certainly lacking in that department. They had, you look to your parents as an example of how to be, and they had very, very poor examples. And both Ed and Henry attended a one-room school in Plainfield, Wisconsin, and Ed attended until he was age 14, which was fairly typical of the time and where they were rurally. It was fairly normal for boys of that age to quit school at 14 and to start working on the farming community, which Plainfield was and still is. That was fairly typical. And in school, Ed kept himself to himself, as you could imagine. His classmates, who varied in ages, they weren't all the same age, as is the case in rural, isolated schools, said that Ed would keep himself to himself, as you could expect. Would only really talk to Henry, and if he was to talk at all, and would laugh at jokes seemingly that he was telling to himself in his own head, and that struck the other students as him being fairly odd, which is to be imagined given the background and home life he has, and had. I'm surprised he wasn't doing more bizarre things at school. And also, he was a very good reader. He was of average IQ, and despite the trauma, he was still, of average IQ. He could read very, very well. It wasn't too academic, but loved reading and was very passionate about reading, and that was his main hobby outside of school and farm work was books. And I believe that was instilled in him by his mother, because every night they would go through mainly the Old Testament of the Bible, which she would use to instill this sense of fear and coming judgment in Ed and Henry. Whereas George was just passed out drunk on whiskey. He'd long since tired of her antics and just kind of resigned himself to just getting drunk all the time and basically doing fuck all around the farm. And Augusta and the boys were basically, running the show on that front. But yeah, she would do Bible study sessions with them every day, and I think from that he caught Ed Gein caught the reading bug from that, and continued reading throughout his life, even in his years in a mental institution after he was caught. He would run a library service inside the institution. So that just shows you how maybe in another life, if he'd have gotten help, deep psychological help and medication, maybe he could have gone on to be an author and write about his crazed experiences as a form of therapy. You never know, and he probably did do that in the mental institutions. I'd be surprised if the psychiatrists never prompted him to do that as a form of therapy, but such writings never saw the light of day. I would be very curious, though, if they were to ever get out there. Of course, he was a severely ill man, but just hearing, life from his perspective about something about his childhood and about where he thought maybe things went wrong and how, society should and could handle people like him better and look out for people like him better, then maybe, we can prevent murders, and prevent criminality, which is a consideration. And both, yes, and Father George died in 1940, and obviously Gein left school at 14. So up until this point, in adult life, Gein didn't leave the farm. Henry didn't leave the farm. They stayed in the regiments as adult men under the total domination and control of their mother. However, Henry strayed a little, as we'll get into. Henry basically was having sex with and was settling down with a woman who had already had kids to another man. And this was wrong in Augusta's eyes on two fronts. She banned both Henry and Ed from having sex, not even getting married and having sex, like is the Christian tradition. You get married, you be fruitful, and you multiply. That's what it says in the Bible. But she was riding on her own script. She said that sex of any kind was evil, despite the fact that obviously she had to have had sex with George Gein at least twice to have had the sons. But yeah, she said to them both that sex was evil and that they should never give up their virginities, and Henry did, and she found out about it, and that caused some issues, certainly, as we'll see. But George died in 1940 of issues related to his alcoholism, and Henry died in 1944 in a fire. However, the fire had already been started on their property and was a bushfire. It wasn't started by anyone. However, when they found Henry's body, he had, bruises and wounds on his head that would suggest he was attacked and you would, and I personally feel that Ed killed him under the direction of Augusta, because Augusta felt like she was losing the control over Henry. Henry was going to leave and settle down with this woman. He'd already had sex with her, she knew, out of wedlock, and not that that would have mattered to Augusta, it was still evil. So I believe Augusta ordered Ed to kill his own brother, and Ed did. And that's the saddest thing, because I know it. I was thinking about it when I was researching this case. I mean, I have a brother. If I was in this situation with my brother and my sister, I think if anything, it would keep us stronger. You know what I mean? Like, it would be us against the mother, or us against the parents. You know what I mean? I don't think that we'd be turned like that. But Ed clearly was loyal to his mother to a T, but the police, despite being suspicious of that, didn't press it at all enough, and accepted that it was an accidental death, which is, unfortunate, because these two women who Gein killed and all the graves he robbed, that wouldn't have happened if they'd have put him away for that. But hindsight is a 2020 thing. You'd expect the police to do their jobs, but no. The mental institution ended up being a very good place for him. I actually think he was happier there than he ever had been. The structure was good for Ed. I completely agree. He didn't know any different than a controlled regimented life, and the regimented life in the institution was far more healthier than the regimented life on the farm. He wasn't being abused in the institution. He was being medicated, and he was getting therapy in the institution, and he was able to indulge in his hobbies that were positive and not destructive and unhealthy. His bookkeeping and his reading habits, and his amateur librarianship. He was able to do that and embrace that, and feel safe. And by all accounts, he wasn't one of those kind of people who kind of just withdrew once they were in the institution. He actively tried to make himself better. He followed all the directives. I think Ed Gein was a very conditioned person from a very young age, and as a result of that, despite him acting out so badly and having such bad mental illness, he was diagnosed paranoid schizophrenic, which I think was inherited genetically from his mother. But I think that he responded well to structure, like you said, Neat, and well to authority. Obviously with his mother, that was a negative thing, but in the institution, it was very much a good thing for him, and he improved his mental condition and was stabilized enough. But I don't think at any point he could have been released to the outside. I don't think he would have been able to cope. Look what happened, as we're going to get into now, when he was left alone, when there was nobody around him, when he was left to his own devices. With, like you say, Neat, that structure and that regiment and that authority figure, but a good authority figure that isn't abusing him, created the best possible environment for him. He couldn't have functioned in the real world, or the outside world, should I say? The real world, of course, it was the real world where he was. The outside world. The outside world. I don't think he could have functioned at all. He's too damaged. But he was able to get well enough to have a fairly decent life institutionalized, which isn't easy based on his condition and everything he went through as a child, and what he did, But yeah, and Augusta died a year after Henry in 1945, and like I was leading into, this left Ed on his own for the first time in his life at the age of 39. And at the funeral of Augusta, it was said that Ed cried very much like a young child who'd lost a mother or a parent, as opposed to a 39-year-old man who'd lost a parent. He was screaming, crying, and wailing, and on the floor in hysterics, displaying his lack of emotional development or maturity. He was stunted emotionally and developmentally because of the abuse that he went through. And you know, as you know, some of the and then after his mother died, Ed would continue what he was doing before, as well as managing the farm. He would be like the local handyman in the town. So like housewives who needed a job doing, or older folks who needed some work doing on their home would call up Ed and pay him a few bucks, and he'd do it for them, and he'd always do it well. And everyone said who lived in the town uh, that he would always do a job 110%. That he was an absolutely brilliant worker, always on time, always punctual. The only kind of negative thing is that some of the women said that he kind of creeped them out a bit, but that's to be expected given his, you know, who he was and his lack of social skills. But they didn't feel creeped out of him by him enough to not let him babysit their kids, because that's right. Ed Gein was the town babysitter as well, and would babysit kids when the parents were out of town or were going out for a meal or work, and he'd babysit. And there is absolutely zero reports of him ever mistreating any child. Apparently, you know, he connected with children in a positive way, a very healthy way, and was able to relate to children better than he was able to relate to adults, and was socially more able to talk with and interact with kids than adults. And I think maybe it's because in his head, like, he thought kids were pure of sin, uh, you know, based on his mother's, you know, indoctrinations of her radical teachings. You know, children are, you know, you don't think of children as being sinful. So I think he felt more at ease with kids. And I think because of his emotional and developmental stunting and the abuse he went through, I think in many ways he felt like a child, because a lot of his life was sexless. Not that he didn't have the urges, but because his mother forbid it, you know what I mean, and demonized it. So I think in many ways he could identify with children because they are sexless. You know, they're supposed to be, of course, unless they're sadly abused. But I think in those senses, that's why he was able to um, relate to and feel comfortable with children and have healthy bonds with them. You know, apparently all the kids who he babysit with had nothing but nice things to say about him, and all the families he babysitted, when they heard what he'd done and what he'd been arrested for, refused to believe it. They said they always thought he was a little different, but he always appeared harmless, and the kids said he was nothing but great. So how could he have done these things, you know? And it just shows you, you know, you don't you don't know what people are like behind closed doors. And he was clearly good at keeping his you know, his secret habits to himself. But the history of his, you know, sexual issues goes back to obviously his mother forbidding sex and creating the concept that sex is evil. But she caught him when he was in puberty masturbating in the bathtub, and I don't know why she was walking in on him in the bathtub. And she lack of boundaries, and she caught him masturbating, you know, as is a normal thing. It's not an evil thing at all, it's completely natural. And she sexually abused him. She grabbed his penis in a very, very violent way and made him perform masturbation in front of the family, in front of his brother Henry and his father George, and made them and her and made them watch and shame him for it. So his mother was clearly a sick, evil woman. I think if Ed had not had her as a parent, I don't think he would have had these issues at all. I think his issues are completely rooted in his mother. Of course, he was an adult. He had the ability himself to go out and seek help and know that what he was thinking wasn't right, wasn't normal, and what he went through wasn't right, wasn't normal, and that instead of acting out on these bizarre, sick thoughts and fantasies. Actually take some like ownership over your own life, over your own body, over your own intentions, over your own actions, and protect yourself and go and get that help, and have the strength to go and do that. But he didn't have it. He had that choice, but he didn't do it. He certainly knew he wasn't right, and what had been done to him wasn't normal. You could see the way other people were and lived and interacted. Of course, he knew it wasn't normal at all. But I think the chemical imbalance in his brain, which flipped a switch at a very young age, it's very hard to unflip that switch, even if you're aware of how bizarre and unnatural it is, and also where it comes from, abuse. It's easier said than done. It takes a lot of medication and counselling, years and years and years, and it's not a definite thing that somebody can actually go and overcome. It takes a lot of effort and willpower as well, and the desire to actually want to get better, and the belief that you can. I think a lot of people who suffer from mental illness feel doomed and trapped and hopeless, and like no matter no this cocktail of medication isn't going to work. This, because you've already tried 1,000 ones already. This therapy ain't going to work because I've already tried 1,000 therapists. So, you got to imagine, back in the 50s, it was even harder to get mental health help, especially in rural America, uh, and also social services. These days would have been able to identify, and teachers would have been able to identify that Augusta and George were abusive parents and removed Henry and Ed from the home. But there was no social services in their town. There was no infrastructure like that to protect kids in those days, sadly. And another instance from his childhood that explains some of his psychosexual pathology. He saw his parents slaughter a hog, and he. It's not a nice way to put this, but he. How can I say it without being too crude? He ejaculated himself without masturbation. He saw his parents. He watched his parents slaughter the hog when he was in his teen years, and he ejaculated just by seeing it. He wasn't masturbating. He just instantly ejaculated, which is not a common thing. Okay, it's not very usual for men or teenagers to just ejaculate. Obviously, wet dreams in puberty are normal, but from seeing something, from not being aroused at all to just completely ejaculating is not very common. So that, shows that his level of, warped psychosexual pathology was certainly present from a very young age, and from before, the boundaries of all that, the I guess not boundaries, the breadcrumbs for all that, the precursor to all that was already set prior to puberty from all of his mother's psychopathic decrees of all kinds of sex is evil and masturbation is evil and women are all whores and men are sex obsessed maniacs and everybody's evil and sin's evil and you're all going to burn in hell. So that set the tone. And then as soon as he started puberty, that his mind just completely collapsed on itself almost, and he associated violence with sex. And that combination is a deadly one, especially if it's set at a very young age, especially in puberty. And I believe that ever since those early formative years, he would have violent sexual fantasies that he would try to suppress, because of his mother's abuse and her decrees to him about a normal sexuality. He developed an abnormal sexuality. You can't fight nature. It's completely normal to masturbate. It's completely normal for teenage boys to lust over teenage girls, and vice versa. You know what I mean? Puberty and sexual hormones is completely normal, and to deny nature is never going to lead to good things, as is the case, as we can see in Ed Gein's case. Hi, Amber. Glad you could make it. I'm so glad you could make it. And I know you're very busy. I know you've got your live about Turtle Boy and his legal situation with his ex. So I'll do my best to make it for that. I'll certainly be there for the start of it, if not all of it. I have rugby commitments tomorrow, so I've got to get quite an early night. But I would love to stick around in your chat and hang out for a bit after I've done. So yeah, you guys should totally check out Amber after my live's over, and check out her channel. I've guested on there many times, and she's a great friend of the channel and a great mod and a great supporter of mine, and an all-around good person who has some very interesting views, very strong views about true crime and cases, and doesn't hold back on what she feels, but at the same time doesn't allow her strong views about things to create a cult-like situation like what we try to avoid here. Me and Amber are similar creators in the sense that we both like to have an open forum, an open discussion where all views are accepted as being valid. You know what I mean? Everyone is allowed to have different views on cases, and that's what makes a good channel. A discourse, a conversation, as opposed to an echo chamber. And that's why I really value Amber and her channel, because she creates that kind of atmosphere, and that's certainly had a big inspiration to me as well. And Ed, after his mother died, after Augusta died, basically left her room in a completely preserved condition, and almost treated it like a shrine, like a holy shrine, and would light candles and say prayers to his mother in the room, and it's where he would go to kind of feel close to her. And in her final year of life, after his dad had died and his brother had died, he also used to slip into bed with her. And that's what he said. I don't know if that means he actually had sex with her, but I honestly wouldn't be surprised. She already molested him as a kid. So I wouldn't put it past her to have, had an incestuous relationship with him as an adult. I really don't, and I because of how abused and groomed he was by her, and controlled by her, I don't think he would have felt able to say no to anything she said. As I said earlier, I feel that she ordered him to kill his own brother, Henry, because she felt he was straying from the family, the cult of the Geins that was ran by Augusta. And anyone straying from the cult has to go. And you're very welcome, Amber. I hope you and the family are doing well. It's always nice to catch your lives, and I hope I can be on one soon. I know you haven't really been having guests on as much, but I always love our times where we panel up, and it's a really good experience. So yeah, anytime you feel like a guest, I'm always mostly free, and I'd be glad to oblige. And Ed would get into. Yeah, I already said that. Sorry, going over old notes. Ed Gein killed his first woman, and a large and tough talking bar owner called Mary Hogan in 1954. Ed was a regular in the bar, which suggests after his mother died, he broke from a few of her rules. I believe he obviously because he was in the bar, he would have been drinking. So prior to that, his mother would forbid him and Henry to drink, and anything fun they weren't allowed to do. And any time like they'd show interested in wanting to drink or have sex with a woman, she just compared them to their father. And obviously they both hated and were scared of their father because he used to do the beatings in the house. As I've discussed, he was an alcoholic and felt emasculated by Augusta, who basically ordered him around and took out his frustrations on her, on his own sons. And she used him, I believe, as her thug, as her boot boy, her bulldog, to scare the boys and to push them to be more loyal to her. It was a classic manipulation. I think this woman, Augusta, was the truly evil one. I think Ed Gein was just severely ill, mentally ill. I don't think he was evil. I think he was just an incredibly ill person. I think his mother was mentally ill and evil. I think she was a combination of the two. Because Gein was ill, but he wasn't evil, I don't think. I think if he was evil, he would have harmed the children that he was babysitting, but he didn't. And I think he was just badly sick and traumatized. I think he, obviously, when they got him in the mental institution, as I discussed earlier, got him on with a proper therapist who knew how to deal with people like him, a team of psychiatrists, nurses looking after him, and a solid routine and good medication, and was able to indulge, like I previously said, his love of reading and became the librarian of the mental ward, and was able to get out his passions that were healthy, and also have a nice regimented routine that was ideal for him, because all he ever knew was regimented routine, up until his mother died, and that's when everything fell off. You know what I mean? That's when he was struggling, I think, quietly for a very long time with the thoughts, the violent sexual thoughts in his head, but he just never acted on them. But until obviously, I think he killed his brother Henry, and then obviously he killed Mary Hogan. But he went to the bar that Mary Hogan owned. She was considered to be she was a loudmouth, like tough talking woman, big woman, and like a very much like a really an expression used very often, but like a man's woman. You know what I mean? Like a woman that could be like one of the guys, not like not a lesbian, but a a a woman that was able to bust balls with men, a tough woman, and that's how she was. That's who she was, and she was. Like, she knew Ed well. He wasn't like a regular. He would come in, he would chat to her in passing and a few other people, but generally kept himself to himself. But one day, when she was closing up, he killed her, and it's unsure. I'm unsure, and he never really went into great detail as to why he selected Hogan to be the first woman he killed. But I personally believe it was due to her personality, that she was a strong and domineering type woman. And I think he saw aspects of his mother in her. And also, you've got to understand, she owned her own business, and Augusta Gein owned her own business. She owned the grocery store in the Cross before they moved to Plainfield, and so she's a strong, domineering woman, tough talking woman, owned her own business, just like his mother. I think he was targeted her because he saw his mother in her, and he, despite his deep devotion and complex feelings. I think deep down inside him, he knew what she'd done to him was fucking evil and that she was evil and he hated her. But he had so many complex feelings and misunderstood feelings and just trauma that it was difficult, near impossible for him to truly rationalize and comprehend all that. So I think he felt that and acted on impulse. I don't think he really planned it too well, and he killed her, and she was found dead in her bar, and he fled the scene. And then hardware store owner Bernice Warden in 1957, and the killing of Bernice Warden is what led to his eventual capture, because he was known to be the last customer of hers. And now again, Bernice Warden, she owned her own business, the hardware store. She was a tough woman, like his mother. He was murdering women he felt were like his mother because he hated his mother because of the abuse that she'd put him through. But he didn't know that. He couldn't rationalize that. So he was acting on these unnatural impulses as a way to get out that frustration, get out that anger, get out that pain, that hurt, that misery, that shame that his mother put him through to in some ways get even. But at the same time, uh, that brainwashing that she put into him was so deep. And it's only natural to love your parents, even if they are abusive pieces of shit. It's nature, sadly. You know, we love our parents who bring us into this world, even if they treat us badly. And that's the complex emotions and feelings that Ed was going through, and he just couldn't rationalize it, come to terms with it, or nothing. And a shame he didn't get any real help. And he engaged in grave robbing after his mother had passed as well. He started, he said, in 1947 and did it from between 47 and 52, but stopped when he started murdering women for real. And whilst doing this, he engaged in human taxidermy. So he was making trinkets and clothing like belts, lampshades, chairs out of body parts, human corpses, human flesh. And in the local paper, he'd read the obituaries, he'd study them, and then as soon as a body went in the ground, he'd go right into the graveyard and dig it up. And he replaced, you know, seeing a pretty woman in like a bar or a restaurant and going to speak to her and getting to know her and then taking her home and having sex with her. He replaced that with going to seeing the pictures of women who died in the paper, going to their graves, digging them up, having sex with their corpses, and making, you know, trinkets and furniture out of their body parts. So yeah, it wasn't normal at all, to say the least, for old Gein. And as a result of this human taxidermy, when the police when the police raided his home, related to the investigation of Bernice's disappearance, the hardware store owner, they assumed that Gein was a mass murderer, that he'd killed people in the dozens, because of the sheer number of human remains that he had at the property. But obviously, he explained with his grave robbing was the precursor to his actual murdering, and he this is where, you know, an element that modern horror movies have been inspired by. Obviously, you have Texas Chainsaw Massacre, where there's the Leatherface, you know, in the home where he's got all the bones hanging around everywhere, you know, as like trinkets and things like that. And he also directly inspired Silence of the Lambs because he had a woman suit that he would put on, that was basically a skin suit of a woman, like Buffalo Bill was trying to make in Silence of the Lambs. That's what inspired that movie. And he also inspired Norman Bates' Psycho, a killer who was deeply, connected to and infatuated with his mother. And the woman's suit that he wore, which was made out of a woman's skin, a woman's body completely, he would wear that, including sexual parts as well. He would wear that, he admitted, and would pretend to be his own mother. So this is how fucked up Ed Gein was. This is how psychologically ill this man was. He was grave robbing, and he was making taxidermy trinkets out of human remains, and he made a suit of a woman, and he was pretending to be his mother. This is all kinds of fucked up and crazy. Uh, and then those activities led him to go, right, this isn't good enough. It's like people who, watch violent pornography, you know what I mean? Not always do they actually go out and well, I guess pornography in general, it doesn't generally have to be violent, but pornography in general, like people look at Playboys, teenage boys look at Playboys, or they don't anymore, but they did back in the day, or they watch pornography now, and then that inspires them to want to go out and do the acts for real, as well as the hormones and everything like that. Uh, so Ed Gein didn't have that level of sexual development, and for me personally, I don't think pornography is a very healthy thing. I think it's very destructive. I think sexual fantasies, you can have, in your own mind without having to use pornography. You know what I mean? I think that's far more healthier than pornography. But each to their own. I don't judge people who want to view it. I believe it's everyone's right, as long as it's legal, consenting adults. I don't see a prerogative for it. But I personally view it as unhealthy, and I don't view pornography at all. I have no interest in that. But normal people, they fantasize about sex. And Gein's version of all that was and experiences of sex was with corpses, and because he was so, I guess, that his lack of social development in courting and dating, in developing the abilities to have relationships with women from a young age, he just lacked it. Lacked it completely. So he found it more easy to do it with a stiff, where he didn't have to interact with them at all, other than his own weird desires. And they weren't gonna run away from him or turn him down. Very crazy stuff. And he and then on November the 16th, when Bernice Warden disappeared, the local police knew from eyewitnesses that Ed was her last customer at the hardware store. And then Ed was arrested at a neighbor's house. So it showed that, I believe he was probably over there doing work, an odd job, handyman stuff, which he did. I don't think he was really there socially. But he was arrested there, and whilst he was arrested there, the police searched his farmhouse and obviously found his trinkets, all the remains, and obviously the remains of Bernice Warden, her decapitated corpse in Gein's shed, which he referred to as his summer kitchen. Believed he would cook his meals there in an open stove in the summer times and have kind of a barbecue. It's unknown whether Gein ever cannibalized any of his victims, but it's possible. He never admitted to it, but it's possible. He hinted that he had had sex with the corpses. Yes, he didn't explicitly state it. Probably too difficult for him but he alluded to it, and I'd be surprised if he didn't. Because we've all got to have sex, somehow. It's nature, you know what I mean? And if, our minds are so damaged and corrupted and we have such issues in brain chemistry, instead of looking for, like I've said, natural places for that sexual outlet, the mind becomes warped and, broken, and it seeks it in unnatural places because Gein was fundamentally a very unbalanced individual, both chemically and spiritually, any kind of sense, I suppose. And Gein was arrested at his neighbour's. He was quiet and didn't say anything to the cops about it, and just kept the no comment line up until he said, "Right, I'll talk if you get me some apple pie with cheese on the top." And I'm not an American, but I've been in America long enough to know that apple pie with cheese on the top isn't a very normal thing to have. So I think Ed Gein's culinary tastes were as eccentric as his sexual ones, and I we like to have a bit of levity in the show. You know what I mean? We can't be completely serious all the time. Like, unlike Ed Gein, I like to have balance in my life, and we can't always be serious and doom and gloom about everything. I think it's important to try and and that's what actually the local people did in his town whilst he was on trial and in custody for it. They cracked jokes about the whole situation, about Gein, about not the victims, but they cracked jokes at Gein's expense and about Gein's, grave robbing, demeanor and possible cannibalistic demeanor, and I think that was their way of dealing with something that was so unbelievable for them. It would be unbelievable for us now to hear all this, despite being in the true crime world, despite admittedly being desensitized to a lot of stuff. Even then, I would be shocked if somebody in my town had done something like that. Really shocked. And despite me being in a fairly large town, his town was, a lot smaller. And this happened in the 50s when people, were a lot less aware of these types of things. And like, yeah, and like we said earlier, he babysat. He was the local handyman. Despite him being pretty antisocial and lacking the social skills, he wasn't a total loner. He wasn't isolated. He was a part of that community. He was a part of it. And, uh, in relation to his first murder of a woman, the murder of the tavern owner, Hogan, um, back at the time, to people he knew, his associates, the other townsfolk, he joked, he'd be like, "Oh yeah, I killed her," and they'd be like, "Ha ha ha! Of course you did, Ed. Of course you did." They didn't for one second think that he actually did, But he knew what he was. He was fairly able to blend in, pretty well, which is shocking, despite his seemingly poor social skills, and kind of aversion to people. He fitted him better than you would expect, and that's why it was such a shock. If everyone thought he was a monster, no one would have let him babysit the kids. No one would have had him round as their handyman. Uh, he was just seen as a little odd. That was it. You know what I mean? And I have neighbours who are, a little odd. Who are quite to themselves and less sociable than I am. But I don't think for one second that they're up to this. Why would you? You'd have to be some kind of crank yourself to assume that just because someone's a little different, that they're like that. And he was clearly able to hide it relatively well. He wasn't completely far gone. It used to be very common. My dad used to eat it that way. It's surprisingly good. Yeah, yeah. I didn't know actually. Yeah, I've never seen it. You know, I had apple pie back in Europe. You know, it is something that has creeped into. Although it is an American creation and is an Americanism. Uh, I made it myself. I prepared it myself back in. We used to call it food tech in high school when I was in high school in Europe, in Britain. I'm not sure what it's called in America, but cooking, basically cooking classes. And I made a pretty decent apple pie, and that's a skill, the cooking skill, has kept with me ever since. So I'll have to try it actually. So I'm not averse to trying new things in terms of food. I won't eat people like I think Ed Gein might have done. That's the line I draw. And I won't eat like the sexual organs of animals or anything like that. I think that's just disturbing. But I have had some pretty exotic foods when I went to Paris in high school. I had frog's legs and escargot. I wasn't too fond of the snail, but I liked the fried frog's legs. I would say I've had them since, and I've had alligator burgers. You know what I mean? So I'm not averse to that. So yeah, exactly. He wasn't antisocial at all. He was just awkward. Yeah, he was socially awkward because he never had that primary socialization that we all need in childhood. He wasn't able to make, you know, close, lasting friendships. He was able to maintain good acquaintances, but he didn't really know how to have deep bonds with people or really how to open up with people. But he liked being around people, especially children. As I've touched on, he wasn't a paedophile. Although he had violent sexual thoughts, they were never about children. They were always about women that reminded him of his mother. Uh, that was it. Uh, as we said earlier, he babysat, you know, and I think that was his escape, you know, because I think in many ways he was still a child, and in his emotional development, and I think in many ways he felt like a child, and but with all this adult trauma and adult emotions, and in an adult world. And I think that his moment with his times with kids was his reprieve from that, his escape from that. I bet those kids, you know, they were like, Jesus Christ, we were lucky that he wasn't into into being violent with kids, because fucking hell, he would have had every chance, you know. But it's very interesting that he could be so violent with specific types of women, but be completely great, seemingly, with kids. You know, it just shows you how complex trauma and mental illness is. It seems he was trying to get revenge on his mother. The only way he knew how, by getting women who reminded him of her and killing them, and, you know, and in one occasion at least, having sex with the corpse. I live 30 minutes from Ed's home. I have seen all of the places associated with him. I used to work in Plainfield. Wow, that's really, really interesting, neat. You know, if you would like to come up, if you're free, just, you know, for the last bit of the live, to just have a chat about that, because I would love to hear more about the town of Plainfield and his home, and what it's all like. Because I have a picture in my mind of what I think the town looks like and the area looks like, based on, you know, my experience, you know, living in and around Pennsylvania, you know, rural farming towns and places like that I've been through in my drives and my travels, and also in other parts of the states as well. You know, that's generally how I picture the place. But yeah, is population wise, is it bigger now? You know, is what's it like? What's his what's his is his home farm still used as a farm, or has it been built over? You know, I would love to visit the place and maybe do like a reading. I can't right now, but would be happy to another. That's absolutely brilliant. We could do probably like a part two where we discuss, I just do a show where it's like a general true crime live, and you can come up and share, your thoughts on that. But thank you very much for offering another time, and for sharing that with us, and for being in the live Neat. That's really fascinating. I would love to visit the town and to maybe interview and speak to some people that are still alive who are around back in '57, because obviously they're going to be pretty old, but if they were 20 back then, they're going to be in their early 90s now. So, but there'll still be people around who are old enough to remember. If you were 10, you'd be old enough to remember it. And if you were 10 in '57, it's only 47 that you were born, so you'd be in your late 70s now. So sure, there'd be plenty of people. Yes, I had heard his farm had burned down, but I didn't know if a new farm had been built on top of that, or another house, or if the land is just destitute for anyone to just wander onto. As I'd love to just go there and kind of feel the energy of the place, and see if that kind of trauma and pain has been left behind, or if it's dissipated over time, if the area doesn't feel like that. And the town has about 500 people. Oh wow! So it's a it's still around the same. It's still the same number it had then. The people don't like to talk about it still. If you contact me on Discord, I can give you all the info if you want. I said that'd be great. Actually, that'd be really helpful and handy. I'm on Alex Erickson's Discord, so you can find me there and send it to me in Ali's true crime channel in there. That'd be perfect. Or whatever way you want to. That's completely fine. And I understand why they probably wouldn't want to talk about it. I watched a documentary about it. I've seen it a few times, but I rewatched it today in preparation for the live. And some of the people talking about it, like you could tell, like the woman, like she said that like reporters had like descended onto this very obviously you said 500 people, and I'd assume it's probably less back then. Like reporters, she said reporters just descended on this really small town. It's essentially a village, uh, based on its size, uh, and all these reporters. She said one even came from England. It was such a big story, and they were accosting and harassing all the townspeople for information and answers, and they just kind of get sick of it. And she said in the end, she said, "I've got no comment to make," which is understandable. But they did talk about it in that documentary, so I never know. Thanks for the warning, Neat, and prepping me for probable mass rejections from inquiries from locals to speak about it. But you never know until you try. You don't get unless you ask. So, but thank you for prepping me for that, and I'll tread carefully with how I approach it. But I would like to have a person who was alive when it happened on, or interview them uh, by correspondence, and either write it down and keep them anonymous, or whatever. You know what I mean? Just get a quote from somebody like that, because I want my channel to be more than just me talking, or just the occasional guest, that's my friend, or a subscriber talking. You know what I mean? I want people who are close to the source. You know what I mean? I want it to be more compelling and more real for you all. Um, and I'm going to try my hardest to achieve that. It's actually beautiful. The land has not been built on. Oh, that's great! So I can go and visit and just check it out, and it's a free for all basically. I mean, even if it is part of someone's farm, you know what I mean? It's like as long as it's not too, you know, visible, the spot where it was, I could always have a mosey on by and ask whoever owns it if I can check it out. And the worst they can say is no. Or well, the worst they can say is get fucked or fuck you. But it's if it's their land, it's their land, it's their prerogative. But hopefully it's a free for all, and I can just show up and check it out and just kind of read the vibe of the area. But I'm glad that it's a very beautiful place, as I imagined it would be, very scenic, and wow, it was bigger then. Uh, it was bigger then. I'm in Ali's too, so go ahead and message me if you want. I think that's perfect. Thank you very much. It was bigger then. Yeah, I've. I know I said I thought it may be bigger now, but I have noticed in kind of a weird hobby I have of studying the demographics, population numbers of specific towns and settlements and places that I have an interest in. A lot of them are quite rural and isolated places, and I've noticed, or historically significant places, and I've noticed that rural America is essentially dying on its ass. A lot of these places, these rural communities, are just getting smaller and smaller and smaller. So that lines up what you're saying. It was bigger then. Lines up with that trend, which is a shame. Although I think Augusta was, Ed Gein's mother was a psychopath and an extremist and a child abuser, and she got them away from lacrosse for the wrong reasons. I do think that there is benefits of living in rural communities and having a farm life, and living on the land. That's what I believe in, and I support those ideals. So it's not something that I'm going to critique or criticize. I think that it's rural living is good and is healthy. But we've got to have these checks and balances in these rural locations, because a lot of the time, you're isolated. Sometimes Gein's mother isolated the family so she could abuse them all. So you've got to have checks and balances, social services, and people keeping an eye on each other in these isolated communities. And because if someone's got ill intent, sadly, it can thrive in the darkness. You know what I mean? And it's harder to spot these things, rurally. So yeah, I went to the jail he was held at last month, and so that's so cool. Neat. I'd love if you could, if you had taken pictures, if you were allowed to. I'd love if you could put that on Ali's Discord, because that would be very interesting to see. And sorry, excuse me, just coughing a little. But yeah, having the picture of his cell or anything like that would be really cool to put me in the, kind of make me imagine how he was in there. You know what I mean, and what it was like. You have to look at it from the road. All right, that's fine. Remember to hit the like, everyone. Been listening while cooking. Oh, thanks for still listening, Amber, and encouraging everyone to hit the like. And what are you cooking? I hope it's something Italian. I've been having pizza. I've had pizza, homemade, not some Pizza Hut or Domino's crap. If I'm to buy pizza, it's from a proper Italian restaurant, done traditionally, family run place. But if not, I'll make it myself. I know I'm not Italian, but I do my best. But yeah, I very much love Italian food. It's my favorite type of food. Can't go wrong there. And so Ed was Ed, after confessing to his crimes, he was put on trial, but ordered to go through a mandatory psychical evaluation. mental evaluation, and he was determined then to be, as I think most of us would have been able to deduce, who don't have a psychological background, that he was a paranoid schizophrenic. Uh, it seemed though that when after his mother died, that's when it really became full blown paranoid schizophrenia. It seems before then he was suffering with psychosis, and like with many people who have underlying psychosis, it can be one traumatic event that sets them off into full blown schizophrenia or psychopathy. And that one event was Gein's mother dying, and I believe, and he was found mentally incompetent and paranoid schizophrenic in 1957. However, they did put him on trial for the Hogan murder, which he was found competent and guilty of. However, he was found incompetent for the later murder of Bernice Warden. However, he was never sentenced to prison. He spent his entire duration of incarceration in various mental hospitals, and he died of respiratory issues on July the 26th, 1984. So he lived a very, very long life. And I was surprised by how long he was alive. He died in his late 70s, you know what I mean? He was nearly 80 when he died. And by all accounts, as I've said, the mental institution, the routine of it all, his bookkeeping, it all went well. He was never violent in the mental institution. As soon as he was medicated and, was underwent therapy and was under a strict regimen and wasn't left idle, um, he carved out a pretty decent life for himself. And it's just a shame, though, that he couldn't have gotten all that help before he broke the law, before he decided to take life. And Ed Gein is a lesson of why, we need to look out for children who are being abused. And for people who have been abused in childhood and in adulthood, we've got to give them understanding and therapy and help to deal with such traumas that can be nigh on impossible for one individual to deal with on their own. Uh, and yeah, I just think it's a case that should, be used to raise awareness of how important mental health help is and how not to raise a child. If you do the exact opposite of what Augusta Gein did and what George Gein did, as a parent, you'll raise a decent child. You'll raise a child that's well adjusted. And like I said, I don't think that Gein was an evil person. I think he was a deeply mentally ill person who, with the right treatment and medication and environment, was able to lead a healthy life. And like I said earlier, I think that he would never have been able to cope in the outside world, and that supervision in the institution was certainly needed. But in those parameters, he did well. And it's just a shame, like I said, it came to that he couldn't have had that institutional help a lot earlier in his life. And who knows, like I said earlier, with his love for books, he may have written a few books of his own about his childhood and about what he experienced. And as I said right at the start of the live, it's possible that very likely even that his therapists encouraged him to write about his own experiences and about his own thoughts and feelings as part of therapy, and that he may well have had writings, that have never seen the light of day, possibly part of his, patient confidentiality, because they were part of his treatment. But I would be very, interested to see anything that he would have written or produced. But that's all I have for this evening. And of course, I want to thank my sources. Of course, there's many documentaries about Ed Gein on YouTube, but also there's the Netflix episode about him in that series. I'm not sure if it's a Ryan Murphy series, but it seems like a Ryan Murphy series. It seems like everything that's true crime on Netflix is Ryan Murphy produced these days. And I thought it was fairly decent. But like I prefer to stick with the documentary cold hard facts when it comes to true crime. I'm not as keen on the dramatizations, especially the ones done by American productions, as I've touched on in earlier lives. I think that Europeans do true crime cases in movies better than Americans do. But I think American TV is better than British TV. Like I prefer American sitcoms and soaps over British ones. But I like British crime and true crime movies and true crime movies based on real events that are British and Irish more so than American. Like I've said many times, I think a lot of cases are butchered by their interpretations of it. I think that Ryan Murphy really butchered the Melendez brothers case when he portrayed it. I think that adding in elements that were perverted and seemingly from his own weird mind. And I think that um, the kind of movie they made about the Watts case was absurd as well. And I think many other one American true crime movie that I did enjoy was the one about Bundy. I liked the one about Bundy. I think that was a very good one, and I liked I liked that one. I think that was good. I thought the Son of Sam movie was shit because it didn't focus on him as a person. I think it should have focused on Berkowitz, not these fucking random gang of people in New York. I would want to see it from Berkowitz's perspective. That was the movie I would have made. Not not from an outsider's perspective looking in. I want to know it from the killer's perspective more than anything else. I want to understand what motivated them to offend. That I think that's the main point of true crime, isn't it? But thank you very much, everyone, for sticking with us to the end. And in case I don't see you, good afternoon, good evening, and good night. And I hope you all have a great weekend. And I'll see you in about an hour's time over at Amber's live that she's doing about Turtle Boy and his ex. So I hope you all join us over there when it starts. And yeah, thank you everyone very much. It's been a really enjoyable experience, a difficult case to cover, but a very enlightening case, and a case that we need to remember and learn from, like we do with all of them here. This isn't a channel that just prides itself on talking about blood and guts and sex and gore. I'm actually trying to be objective about these things. I'm trying to figure out solutions to or ways we can learn from these cases and these people's pathologies and these tragedies and try to prevent them from more of them happening. You know what I mean? I think that should always be the point, that we can learn from these people, treat these people or punish them depending on their state of mind and motivation, and learn from it. Like, I don't think you need to have a doctorate in psychiatry or criminology to have an opinion. uh, you know, um, yeah, I like delving into the more psychological aspects of cases, the frame of somebody's mind, what could have led them to commit the murders. Because no one just wakes up and just randomly starts killing. It's a long process and a lot of trauma or mental illness that leads someone down that road, and we've got to be able to identify it and get people help when they need it and punish them when they deserve it. But yeah, thank you very much, Neat, Amber, and Daria from MA. Glad you enjoyed it, and If you haven't already, please leave a like on the way out, because it really helps me in the algorithm and all that shit. And with what we discuss, I don't like to be censored. I like to use the proper words for things. So YouTube likes to not push my channel as much as it does for channels that use silly censor words for stuff. I like to say the proper words because we're adults here. My channel is for adults. It's not for kids. The music I do is for kids. My music is for kids. That's for everybody to enjoy. But the true crime discussions are 18 plus. But thank you very much, everybody, and take care. Thanks.